welcome on behalf of the Economics Department of the American College of Greece to this panel's discussion entitled Greece in the Euro, Prospects and Scenarios. I know that as an economist, I should follow the tradition of our profession's mistrust towards psychological explanations of economic phenomena. Yet I think that the psychologist is urgently needed, not only to explain the current madness regarding the economic crisis in our country, but also my reading of the title of this panel's discussion. When I read the title of today's discussion, I did not see that the word prospects and scenarios were in the plural. I read them in the singular. Apparently, my mind could not accept the fact that there are alternative prospects for Greece's future. I was convinced that the only prospect was the euro, and the only scenario was the solution of our debt crisis, always within the eurozone. Never did my mind go, for example, to deep haircuts, to disorderly defaults, to credit events, to bank runs, to the drachma, to going back to the 50s, to foreign exchange controls and to black and white films where emaciated and unemployed people dreamed of fasolades, bean soups, macaronades, spaghetti, and cardella, bread rolls. I think psychologists call this denial, but I'm not sure. I knew that in the late 19th century, Greece had joined the Latin Monetary Union, a regime of bimetallism and of fixed exchange rates pegged to gold and silver, and eventually was led out of it helter-skelter because of a, guess what, debt problem, leading, of course, to the collapse of the LMU. But I thought that things in our modern Cayenne, as opposed to the then Araba, horse carriage-driven society, are different. That today we have the political, economic, and financial wherewithal and sophistication to manage the EMU better than the LMU. I thought that there is only one prospect, one scenario: stay within a strong and stable eurozone and not heed our American brethren's warning that this is far from an optimal currency area. Our distinguished guests in the panel are, alas, not psychologists, but highly experienced and accomplished economists, financiers, politicians, and men of business. They may not therefore be qualified to solve my psychological problems, but they are definitely more than qualified to suggest and discuss the ways and means to solve the economic problems of Greece. I am, however, tempted here to say that esavrion ta spudea, literally meaning that tomorrow the European Summit meeting will show whether these problems are indeed solvable. As to the probability of this happening, Paul Krugman wrote in yesterday's New York Times, quote, "Maybe European leaders will come up with a credible rescue plan. I hope so, but I don't expect it. The bitter truth is that it's looking more and more as if the euro system is doomed. And the even more bitter truth," Krugman continues, "is that given the way the system has been performing, Europe might be better off if it collapses sooner than later." Unquote. A prospect that is also shared by Jason Manolopoulos in this lovely little book I just got, in his celebrated book, The Greek Odious Debt, in his words, quote, "The euro, as currently configured, stands little chance of survival," unquote. The depression that would follow such an eventuality would not only be economic, but also deeply psychological. And with this pessimistic view darkening our horizon, I'm ready now to give the floor to our distinguished discussants. Let me, however, explain the rules according to which this discussion will take place. Each of our guests will talk in their first intervention for about 6 to 8 minutes, and I'm going to be quite strict about this because time is extremely limited. We will allow for a discussion, and you're all welcome to participate in this discussion for about 20 minutes. The second intervention will be approximately for each panelist 3 minutes. Okay, so these are the rules, and without further ado, I would like to call upon the floor Mr. Kyriakos Mitsotakis, who is a graduate of Stanford and Harvard universities, and he was the Chief Executive Officer of Finance National Bank of Greece Venture Capital from its inception in December 1999 and until April 2003. He was elected to Parliament for a third time in October 2009. Mr. Mitsotakis.
Well, good morning, Professor. Thank you very much. And let me also thank my good friend Nikos Georgiadis and the American College for putting together what I hope will be a very interesting and certainly very relevant discussion, taking into consideration what is going to happen tomorrow. And let me start by pointing out that if there ever was a date of seminal importance for the future of Greece and Europe, tomorrow probably is that date. The decisions that will be taken tomorrow, I have no doubt about that, will impact, I won't say shape, but they will certainly impact the future of both the Eurozone and the future of our country. Now, I think what is of interest to you is to discuss in a little bit more detail what are the possible scenarios, what could we expect from tomorrow's summit, and what are the likely implications for our country and for the Eurozone. I will spend most of my intervention talking about Greece and just make one comment about the future of Europe. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about how we got into this mess. I think you should probably read this book by Mr. Papadopoulos. I haven't read it yet, but I think it provides a fairly accurate picture of what has happened to Greece over the past years and decades. And if you want to read a very good book about what has happened to Europe over the past years and decades, you should read the latest book by Michael Lewis, entitled Boomerang, which gives a very graphic presentation of what went wrong in those more problematic European economies. Greece is currently facing 3 economic and 2 political problems. We have a balance sheet problem, which is basically a huge debt problem. We have a P&L problem, which is our deficit. And we also have a competitiveness problem, which is tied with both the balance sheet and the P&L problem. We also have, at the same time, a social cohesion problem, which is very, very visible, especially to me as an active politician. And I think at the same time we also have a political personnel problem across the board, taking into consideration that unfortunately Greek politicians have not been very honest about what has happened in Greece over the past years, and some continue not to speak the language of truth at present. I think that the overall consensus is that tomorrow Europe will provide Greece with a solution to the balance sheet problem, i.e. a deep haircut of the outstanding privately held Greek debt, but to make it very, very clear that the P&L problem, i.e. the deficit problem, and the competitiveness problem will have to be solved by our own country. In other words, one cannot expect a magic European solution to our problem, and we all know that the deal that will be presented to Greece is going to come with lots of strings attached, and it may provide light at the end of the tunnel, but the tunnel that we need to cross is going to be long, and it's going to be very obvious. There are no easy solutions to the problem we're facing. There are different policy mixes how we get to the final solution, but there are no easy solutions to the problems that we're facing. Now, assuming that this is a deal that is going to be presented to us, what are the likely implications of this deal? First of all, a deal of such a nature, and I think this is the consensus, must not constitute a credit event. Having said that, a haircut of 50 or even 60% is going to be perceived by some as a credit event, but it is important that this deal is a voluntary deal, i.e. it is important for the banks and the financial institutions to participate in this deal and not challenge it legally. Now, the implication of this deal for the Greek financial sector are very much obvious. Banks will need to raise capital because they will suffer big losses as a result of their exposure to Greek government debt. If those funds cannot be raised by the market, then they will have to rely upon either the Greek mechanism for bank support or the FSF. And that would mean that banks will be either nationalized or Europeanized, depending on which version of the two scenarios we will actually envision as taking place. That is, in my mind, a scenario which is to be expected. The way I think the financial system in a modern capitalist society works is that in order to preserve banks as ongoing concerns and as financial institutions that provide the blood for the economy to function, and in order to protect depositors, shareholders would have to suffer the pain of this restructuring. And that, I think, in my mind, is an inevitable scenario. And that is going to be, in my mind, probably true not just for Greek banks, but also for European banks. Now, there's a big outstanding question mark: what will happen with our pension funds? Because they have a significant exposure to Greek debt. And there, I think, the jury is still out. What will happen to them and whether they will also suffer the full impact of such a haircut, or whether we can envision a scenario by which we can maybe carve out the exposure of Greek pension funds and treat it in a different way. And the last and very important outstanding question is what will be the implications of this deal in terms of funding the primary deficit of the Greek state. As you know, according to the existing Troika agreement, the funds that Greece receives every 2 to 3 months are used both to repay cap principal and interest on the outstanding loans, i.e. to replace private loans with public loans, but also to cover shortfalls in the budget and basically to cover the Greek primary deficit. I have serious doubts as to whether Europe will continue to tolerate the Greek state living beyond its means. So in my mind, it's just a question of when Europe will force us to get to a primary surplus. The worst scenario for Greece would be for Europe to request this to happen immediately. I don't think that will happen, but I think we will have a very limited time framework by which to get our public finances in. So that's more or less the way I anticipate the deal basically turning out. Now, the real question is then whether there is an alternative to this deal. Obviously, we haven't seen it yet, as in great detail. But I think we need to be very, very clear that whereas there are different policy mixes in getting to, for example, the primary surplus target, I think the alternative scenario of envisioning a Greece on a solitary path outside the confines of the European Union and outside the confines of the Euro are going to be totally disruptive for the country. As you know, there is a rhetoric in Greece developed by, thank God for the moment, few people, that maybe this is too much pain to take, and maybe we would be better off if we were to leave the Eurozone and return to the drachma. I want to be absolutely clear with you. I think this is folly. This is a scenario of utter destruction for the country. It's going to take us 50 years back. Any comparison between Greece and Argentina, which is a country we frequently refer to when we want to make such analysis, in my mind is irrelevant, because Argentina is a rich country which at least can feed its own population and managed to get out of the crisis as a result of a commodity boom. Greece does not have the benefit of such a windfall. And as a result, I think that